So, in this day and age, everybody's trying to find a way in which they can secure and protect their family assets. If you don't hear a story about someone actually moving their assets to the closest relative or to their mother, you hear people say they've moved their properties into some other entity or they're planning on moving it to their children, right? So there are so many ways which people have explored and continue to explore. But before we delve into those different ways in which people do this, I just want you to note that each of these decisions that you make have consequences, right? And so it's very important that before you take that step of moving away properties from yourself, that you understand that there's going to be implications to that. For example, I've seen people who have made decisions to move properties to others and have wanted to then have the same amount of control. But they found out later that they don't have that kind of control anymore because that no longer belongs to them. So today I want us to talk about this. What are the different ways in which you can move property out of your own personal capacity if you really want to protect your assets? And one of the things that I say, maybe think about before you make such a decision. And number three, just so you understand what the implications are, we'll talk about a few of the implications of you taking those particular steps or making the decision of moving a property to either another person or an entity. Right, so for the people that are new here, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and a director at a law firm here in South Africa, Johannesburg. Welcome. We thank you for coming here and being here today. And to all those that are returning, welcome back. Let's get into the content. So what are these options that people often exercise, right, when they want to move a property or properties out of their personal capacity to either another person or to an entity? Let's talk about the first one, and that is moving properties to children. So parents often do this, right? And they often say they don't want to burden kids with the responsibility of having to do the transfer from them when they die to the children. And plus, if they do the transfer now, if one of the parent passes away and the other one decides to remarry, there's not going to be a situation where there's going to be now a shift of ownership because this one has decided to get married, right? And so in order to protect the interests of their kids, they would often just move the properties into the children's names. So what is it that I say you need to think about before you exercise this particular option? I think the first thing that a lot of people tend to be surprised by when it comes to this decision that they make is the fact that you need to understand that you lose ownership completely when you do this. If you're going to move these properties into the children's names, right? You're no longer going to have the kind of control that you think you're going to have. And you're no longer going to have the freedom to deal with that property as you would if it was yours. For example, I've seen situations where parents ended up being kicked out by their own kids after their kids turned 18, and they then were like, okay, I'm the owner. Okay, I don't want my parents living here. And the parents wanted to dispute that, saying that property was ours, we worked for it. But then again, they forgot that they made the decision of moving the ownership from their personal capacity to these kids. And they end up being destitute. No other option, unfortunately, is available to them to safeguard their interests because they've now decided to just wholly transfer this property to these kids. So before you make that decision, just understand this. You lose complete ownership of this property when you do this, and you will definitely be at the mercy of those kids when they become of age. And secondly, one thing you have to understand is that you're not going to be able to just sell this property as and when you like. For example, some people buy, for this particular reason of not wanting to lose properties, they'll buy a property in the child's name or the minor's name, right? And along the way, they'd want to sell that property. But then they would have difficulties because the property belongs to a minor, there needs to be certain permissions that come from the government to give that parent the ability to sell that property. And in most instances, they're not supposed to get the physical amount, right? They need to specify why they need the money. The money is going to go to the guardian's fund, and then they'll get whatever it is that they need for whatever situation. And plus, if it's their own personal situation, or they probably want to do something that is not necessarily in the best interest of the child, or it's not going to really do anything for this child, it's difficult to get the authorization to sell that property. That's when people then get the shock of their lives that, okay, this was not a good idea. So you just need to understand that the implications of this decision, right? Think about this, because once the property has been changed, there's nothing much that can be done. Let's go to the second thing that people exercise, or the option that people exercise when they want to move properties out of their own personal capacities. Now, the second option that people also love to exercise here, with the intent of preserving this property, is to move a property to a company, right? Because in their minds, they're thinking, you know what? This property is better off if it's not in my name, so that even if something happens and creditors come for me on a personal level, the property is protected. It vests under the company. It's owned by the company. So I'm separate. So it will always be protected. Now, what are the things that you just need to be mindful of here, again, when it comes to such a move? It is the fact that now you've moved it to a different owner, and the owner is the company. And remember, a company exists on its own. It does its own thing. It operates, right? And in its operation, a company can either be sued or go through something. So there's a possibility that a company could be sued or could end up being liquidated for whatever reason, which means that that particular property that's vested in there is at jeopardy, right? So you just must be mindful of those consequences. Again, you cannot just call out that property now, because people often think that because that company probably was started by them, they can just call out the property as is and take it out and save it from that situation. If the property belonged to the company now, there's nothing prohibiting the creditors of the company or any other person that's suing the company from attaching that. For example, I've seen situations where companies have failed to pay rent, right? Where they are renting a space for their business. And you'd find that it actually accumulates for the longest of time. And as a result, the landlord would end up suing the company. Now, what happens in this instance? Obviously, when the landlord sues the company is meant to pay. But if the company doesn't have money, it means that the properties of the company become compromised, right? And I've seen people be actually owing a landlord more than 200,000 rand, depending on where they are situated. And so if the company doesn't have this money lying around, or small properties, or rather movable properties that can be sold for this amount of money to be settled, obviously that house then is in jeopardy, or rather is in jeopardy, right? Because it forms part of that company. So you just must be mindful of these things as well. Yes, it's away from your own personal possession now, or name rather. But then again, there are other consequences to doing this. And again, you just must be mindful of, if you're going to use this property for business purposes. Let's say some people love to move properties for the purposes of flipping, meaning that they want to buy a property cheaper so that they can actually make much more money, right? And so if that is your idea, you just must look at capital gains and how it works between a company and you as an individual. So there's a lot of things that you need to think about before you make this move and consider, so that you understand exactly what it is that you're doing. Let's move on to the third thing the third option that people love to exercise when they want to protect their assets and preserve them. And then the third option that I wanted to talk about that people often exercise when they want to protect their assets or preserve them is actually setting up what we call a trust, right? Obviously, trust is an entity that benefits certain individuals that we call beneficiaries. So this often is an option that people take up when they want to preserve that property for the longest of times, right? Because they no longer own that property. So which means that if something happens to them, for instance, they pass away, they are sued by a creditor, that asset is protected. Or even if when they're divorcing, if that asset vests in the trust, it's protected, right? And it's preserved, which means it continues to assist and cater for generations in that family. So this option often is the safest when people want properties to survive for the longest of times and continue to cater for a family. But now, What are the things that I want you to think about? Even though ideally people use this option to preserve properties for the longest of times, some people use it to actually flip properties. Again, you must be mindful of how this is going to affect whatever transaction you're thinking about. Like I said, flipping is you buying properties cheaper with the intention of selling them. If this is your intention, it's not a good idea, because if you look at capital gains tax, it's charged much higher when you're going to sell out of a trust rather than selling in your personal capacity. So these are things that you just must be mindful of. And again, when you move a property into a trust, it means that it's no longer your property. You just continue to benefit from that property, right? Which means that you cannot decide tomorrow, okay, this is what I want to do now. I think, no. That property belongs to the trust, and the trustees are the ones who are going to act in accordance. They're not just going to sell a property because you want them to sell it. The purpose of the property is to vest in the trust and actually assist or be in there for the benefit of everybody who's a beneficiary. And so you cannot just decide and dictate that you're just going to sell the property and deal with it as it is. So this is also something you must be mindful of. You losing ownership here. You're losing control because it's going to vest in the trust, and it's going to be operated as per the terms and conditions of that trust, because every trust has terms and conditions. So at all times when you're going to do this, you have to ask yourself, what is the reason you want to move this property? Why? Is it because you want to preserve this property? You want to protect yourself or the property from future creditors, from divorce? Or are you using it for business purposes? You just want somewhere where these properties are going to be at, and they're not going to really affect you in terms of tax. And also think about tax implications. If, like I said, if you're going to be someone who's flipping this property, think about, if you're flipping it as an individual, what are the capital gains tax and any other taxes that could apply? How does it affect you? Is it higher? Is it lower? If you sell or you run this business under a trust, is it lower? Is it higher? So these are things that you must be mindful of. And one of the most important things that needs to register and you need to understand very clearly is the fact that, unfortunately, whenever you're going to make either of these decisions, whether you move it to your child, this property, or you move it to an entity such as a trust, or you move it to a company, right? You lose ownership for good, right? You lose it entirely. Unless, of course, I don't know, but you lose it entirely. That's something that you're going to have to understand, which means that you don't have an asset in your name. But then again, if that is your goal, that you mustn't have anything in your name, you must just have benefits, of all of the things that you have, then these will be great things, especially if you choose the option of a trust, because it will always benefit you for your lifetime, right? And so there's no way in which your creditors can get access to it. It will always vest in the trust and benefit you and any other person that you list as a beneficiary. So these are the different types of ways in which people often move properties that I wanted us to talk about. And again, just on a last note, don't take generic advice as a way of deciding, right? Because it's important to calculate down to numbers. Calculate how much this is going to cost you to transfer into whatever entity or to any other person. Calculate how much it's going to cost you to run it once you've decided to move it to that entity. Let's get down to to calculations. Let's get down to numbers, right? And don't think that another person's way of calculating their situation is also going to work for you. No, because situations are different. Again, it depends on why you're doing this, and it also boils down to how much this is going to cost you to transfer these properties, and also how much it's going to cost you to maintain this whole thing, and also what the implications are going to be. Because, for example, if you move a property to a child, you will never always have a benefit, unless, of course, you structure it in a certain manner, right? You put in a condition into the title deed. But other than that, you'll never have the benefit of being able to access that property as and when you like, right? Because you're not an owner. The owner is the child, and they have to decide whether you're going to benefit from that property. Whereas if you move it, for example, into a trust, the trust is meant to benefit you in the first place. And so every property that's there can benefit you for the rest of your life, right? So these are things that you just need to map out with your advisor when you're going to make this decision, so that you make the decision that's going to work for you and actually be suitable for your family. So this brings us to the end of our discussion today. Listen, we're hosting a workshop in Sandton on the 24th of September 2024. In case you're someone who's interested, please do send us an email or contact us via WhatsApp or call us on our telephone line. We'll be hosting a workshop talking about wills, structuring of trusts, estate planning, and all of that. Afterwards, we're going to have a one-on-one discussion where we talk about certain things that you just wanted to, or you want to just, understand better. So we're going to do that on the 24th of September 2024, like I said. So if you're interested, make sure to send us an email, because we've got a limited number we're going to take at that particular venue. Guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. We will see you next time. Again, for the folks that are new here, my name is Yolanda Mnyengeza. I'm an attorney and a director at a law firm called Mnyengeza Attorneys, situated in Johannesburg, South Africa. Let us see you next time.